I was halfway through fixing the wire fence on the east side of my property when I saw her white Lexus creeping down the gravel road like a predator. I sighed, wiped the sweat off my brow, and waited. Sure enough, the window rolled down, and there she was, Aubrielle Simmons, HOA board president and certified menace in a cardigan. "Ellis," she said, her voice already laced with fake politeness, "we need to talk about your road. Again." I leaned on the shovel and stared at her. "What about it, Aubrielle?" She adjusted her oversized sunglasses like she was about to deliver a court ruling. "The HOA has decided that gravel is no longer acceptable. All access roads must be paved with asphalt. Yours is an eyesore. It's dragging down property values." I glanced down the road. It was a perfectly maintained rural gravel path, just like every other property on this side of the county. "Aubrielle, we're in unincorporated land. This isn't some suburban cul-de-sac. The county already signed off on gravel when I built this place 5 years ago." She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "That might have been acceptable then, but we're modernizing. It's about aesthetics, Ellis, and compliance." I folded my arms. "Let me guess, you already sent the violation notice. It's already in your mailbox. You have 30 days to pave it. Or we'll begin fining you $200 a week," I laughed. "You can't enforce that. The county code allows gravel roads for rural properties. I checked." She smiled, tight, smug. "We're the HOA. We can enforce community standards beyond county minimums. It's in the revised charter bylaws." "Revised without a vote?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't answer. Just rolled up her window and drove off, kicking up some of that offensive gravel on her way out. I wasn't going to let it go. That night, I pulled out every document. I had my original builder's permit, the county code, and the HOA agreement I signed when I bought the land. I was right. The HOA had no authority to override county standards, especially not for infrastructure outside the shared community zones. My road was on my private land. The only thing they could legally regulate was the shared entrance sign and maybe the community pond. But Aubrielle had gotten bold lately. Ever since she'd stacked the board with her friends, 2 other women who nodded at anything she said, she'd been rewriting rules and issuing fines like she ran a private fiefdom. I decided to pay the county planning department a visit the next morning. I brought all my documents and explained what was going on. The assistant there, a guy named Marcus, raised an eyebrow as I laid it all out. "Yeah, this is illegal," he said, flipping through the HOA's violation letter. "They can't force private road paving unless it's a safety hazard. And yours isn't. It's well maintained. We've got no complaints on file." I nodded. "So if they try to fine me, document everything, keep a paper trail, and if they try to lien your property, call us. We'll get our legal team involved." That's exactly what I plan to do. But Aubrielle wasn't done yet. 2 days later, I came home to find orange construction stakes lining the edge of my driveway, and a bright yellow notice stapled to my fence, "Paving scheduled to begin Monday. Homeowner will be billed accordingly." That's when I knew this wasn't just about aesthetics. Aubrielle was crossing a line, and I was going to drag her back across it, kicking and screaming if I had to. HOA story, hoastories, homeowner association stories by Sunday morning. I'd replaced the orange stakes with laminated "No Trespassing" signs and strung fluorescent cord along the driveway entrance. I'd also mounted one of my trail cams on a tree facing the road, angled just right to capture license plates and faces. I wasn't dealing with some petty disagreement anymore. This was attempted trespassing with a side of fraudulent billing. Late afternoon, I heard tires crunching up the gravel again. I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee just as a black pickup rolled to a stop in front of the cordoned-off entrance. 2 guys in reflective vests climbed out, looking confused. One pulled out a clipboard and walked up to the barrier. "This the Ellis property?" he asked. "Sure is," I said. "You must be the crew scheduled to pave a road I never asked for." He blinked. "We got a work order from the Heritage Pines HOA, said the homeowner had been notified and agreed to the terms." Jobs already paid up front. Paid by who? HOA credit account said it was covered under community improvement funds. I stepped off the porch and met him halfway. That's interesting because this road's on private land, not under HOA jurisdiction. And I've got county documentation backing that up. The second guy, still standing near the truck, scratched his head. We're not trying to get in trouble. If this isn't authorized, it's not. I cut in. And if you try to cross that barrier, I'll call the sheriff. I already talked to the county planning department and they're aware of what's going on. The man with the clipboard sighed. We'll report back and hold off. We don't want any part of this if it's shady. They left without another word, and I watched until their taillights disappeared over the hill. Then I walked straight to my workshop and opened the locked cabinet where I kept my files. I pulled out the HOA's annual budget report, the one they'd mailed out last quarter. Nowhere did it mention a discretionary fund for private infrastructure, and there sure as hell wasn't approval for paving individual driveways. I made copies of everything, then wrote a formal complaint to the county's Office of Consumer Protection. I included scanned documents, the work order left behind by the crew, and a letter detailing how the HOA had misrepresented the job as homeowner approved. Monday morning, I dropped the packet off in person. The woman at the counter, a sharp-eyed administrator named Helen, whistled low as she flipped through the paperwork. If they used HOA funds to pay for unauthorized work on private land, she said, they're in violation of several financial misuse statutes, and if they sent that work order claiming homeowner consent, that's fraud. Can the county do anything? I asked. Oh, the county can and will. This'll go straight to the district attorney's office. In the meantime, I suggest attending their next board meeting. Things might get interesting. That suggestion became a plan. 3 days later, I walked into the HOA meeting at the clubhouse with a folder under my arm and a GoPro clipped to my shirt pocket. I didn't hide it. There were about 20 residents seated in the fold-out chairs, most of them retirees who'd moved out here for peace and quiet. Aubrielle sat at the front table flanked by her two usual allies, Donna and Renee, who looked like they'd been cast from the same mold designer scarves, identical notepads, and matching expressions of practiced concern. We'll begin with old business, Aubrielle said, tapping her pen against her notes. Then move to new projects, including road improvements recently initiated for the benefit of the community. I raised my hand. She hesitated. Ellis, you'll have a chance to speak during open comments. This can't wait, I said, because the road improvement you're talking about was an illegal use of HOA funds on private property. There was a murmur through the room. Aubrielle's smile faltered. That's a serious accusation, she said. Good thing I brought evidence, I replied, opening the folder. Here's the work order your board submitted. It claims homeowner consent. I never gave it. Here's the contractor's statement confirming the job was paid with HOA funds. And here's the letter from the county planning department confirming the road in question is outside your jurisdiction. Donna leaned over and whispered something to Aubrielle, who stiffened. Renee avoided eye contact altogether. I'm requesting a full financial audit, I continued, and recommending the board be suspended pending the results. I've also filed a complaint with the county's legal division. You had no right to, Aubrielle started. I had every right, I interrupted. You tried to authorize a construction project on land you don't control, lied about consent, and used community money to do it. That's not just overreach, that's criminal. Someone in the back stood up. Wait, our dues went to paving his driveway. No work was done, I clarified. Because I stopped it. But the funds were allocated and the contractor was told it was approved. A man in a denim jacket stood. You told us that money was for clubhouse maintenance. Aubrielle's composure cracked. It was reallocated under emergency discretion. It's allowed under the new bylaws. A woman near the front frowned. What new bylaws? Renee finally spoke. They were passed during the March meeting. It was a closed session. You mean the one where only 3 board members were present? I asked. That's not a quorum. You can't pass anything with just yourselves in the room. Now the whole room was buzzing. People were standing, asking questions, demanding copies of the budget. I didn't need to say another word. The residents were doing it for me. By the time the meeting ended, a vote had been called to freeze all discretionary spending until an independent audit was completed. Aubrielle tried to protest, but the residents were fed up. I overheard one of the newer homeowners muttering something about a class action lawsuit. The next morning, I got a call from Helen at the county office. The DA's office was officially investigating potential financial misconduct by the HOA board. They'd subpoenaed the HOA's bank records and requested interviews with the contractors involved. She said I'd likely be contacted as a witness. That same afternoon, a certified letter arrived at my mailbox. It was from an attorney representing the HOA, probably an attempt to intimidate me. I read it once, then handed it over to my friend Caleb, who'd been a defense attorney before retiring out here to fish full-time. He read it slowly, then let out a dry laugh. "Bluff," he said. "They're trying to scare you into silence." "They've got nothing. Can they sue me for defamation?" I asked. "Only if what you said wasn't true and you've got documentation. Let them try." I nodded and sat back, watching the sun dip below the ridge. The gravel road glowed orange in the light, same as it always had, same as it always would. The HOA had pushed too far this time, tampered with finances, lied in writing, and tried to steamroll a homeowner with nothing more than arrogance and blank stationery. But they didn't count on someone who knew where to look, who to call, and how to turn their own paperwork against them. They thought I'd fold. Instead, I just started unfolding them, piece by piece. By the end of the week, the HOA clubhouse was locked up with a sign taped to the door, temporarily closed pending investigation. No one had seen Aubrielle since the emergency meeting. Her Lexus hadn't moved from her driveway, but her porch light stayed off at night, and the mail was piling up in her box. Saturday morning, the county sheriff's department rolled down our road in 2 cruisers. They weren't in a hurry, but they weren't sightseeing either. I was out front, replacing a busted post on the fence line, and paused when I saw them stop at the Simmons residence. Deputies walked up the porch and knocked once before stepping back. A few minutes passed, then the door opened barely. More talking. Then one of the deputies radioed something in, and a 3rd SUV arrived, this one marked with the county seal. I kept working, didn't stare. But I noticed the other neighbors weren't as subtle. Mr. Haverson across the way stood at the edge of his garden hose pretending to water the same row of snap peas for 15 minutes. Someone else's drone buzzed overhead, low and obvious. The next morning, I got a call from Caleb. His voice was lower than usual. "They're pulling financial records from the HOA's community accounts. Turns out some of that reallocated money went to a private contractor out of state. No license in the county, no work history here." "Shell company?" I asked. "Looks that way. Probably used to funnel funds." "If they trace the payment trail back to a personal account, it's embezzlement." "Do they have enough for that?" "They're close." "And get this, Aubrielle filed for a building permit 6 months ago. Private pool, not on any shared property. Guess who the contractor listed was?" I didn't answer. "Same shell company. Listed under a different name, but the business address matches the one used for the paving order." I leaned against the fence rail and stared down the hill. "So they used HOA funds for a private pool. Looks like she tried to launder it through a fake road improvement invoice, then redirected the funds into her own pocket. And the paving order for your driveway, that was just a cover." I let that settle in. "How long before charges?" "Soon." "But law moves slower than we'd like. They'll want everything airtight before they move." I thanked him and hung up. The air felt thick, like just before a storm breaks. I walked the perimeter of my land, making sure nothing was out of place. The more exposed this got, the more unpredictable Aubrielle might become. On Monday, a plain white sedan appeared at the community bulletin board near the clubhouse. A woman in a gray blazer and flats stepped out, pinned a document to the corkboard. then took a dozen photos of it with her phone. She didn't speak to anyone and left without acknowledging the residents who had begun to gather. I walked over after she left. The notice was from the county auditor's office. It said a temporary financial freeze had been placed on all HOA-controlled accounts pending review of expenditures, and that criminal proceedings were under consideration. Anyone with knowledge of questionable spending was encouraged to contact the listed number. Below it, someone had tacked up a sheet of paper with the words "Special Community Meeting Thursday, 6 p.m. Bring Questions" scrawled in bold marker. It wasn't signed, but I had a feeling I knew who was behind it. At the meeting, the room was packed. Folding chairs had to be brought in from the back, and everyone was filled. Donna and Renee sat in the front row, hands folded, eyes straight ahead. Aubrielle wasn't there. In her place, a man in a navy windbreaker stood at the podium, flipping through a manila folder. "My name is James Halbrook. I've been appointed as interim administrator by the County Oversight Committee. I'm here to explain what's happening and what you can expect moving forward." He didn't waste time. He explained that the county had found multiple inconsistencies in the HOA's expenditure reports. Funds labeled for community improvement had been redirected to private contractors with no verified service history. Invoices had been altered. Board meeting minutes had been edited after the fact. And most damning of all, payments had been funneled through a third-party company run by an individual with direct ties to Aubrielle Simmons, her cousin, Richard Lane, based out of Arizona. He paused, letting that settle. "The financial impact to your HOA account appears to be in the tens of thousands. We are still investigating the total amount." Someone in the crowd, an older man with bushy gray eyebrows, raised his hand. "What does that mean for us? Are we liable for what she did?" Halbrook shook his head. "No. The county will recover what it can through civil proceedings. If criminal charges are filed, and they likely will be, restitution will be part of sentencing. You will not be expected to cover the losses." Another hand went up. "I heard she tried to pave Ellis's road to make it look like a community project. Is that true?" Halbrook turned toward me. "Mr. Ellis has cooperated with the investigation. His documentation helped uncover the financial irregularities. That work order was a forgery." Gasps swept the room. Donna and Renee looked like they wanted to melt into their chairs. "I want to be clear," Halbrook continued. "This board violated not only your trust but the law. We're in the process of freezing personal assets tied to the misuse. This includes property improvements paid for with HOA money." A woman in the back stood. "So she doesn't get to keep her pool if it was funded illegally," Halbrook said. "It's subject to forfeiture." The meeting ran long. Questions kept coming about dues, about elections, about how this could happen. Halbrook answered each one patiently. When the crowd finally began to thin, I caught his eye and nodded once. He returned it with a quiet nod of his own. Outside, the air had cooled. A few neighbors lingered in the parking lot, clustered in small groups. I passed Donna and Renee, who were speaking in hushed tones near the back of a pickup. Donna looked up as I approached. "You happy now?" she asked. "No one should be happy about this," I said. "But I think people deserve to know the truth." "She didn't mean to hurt anybody," Renee said quickly. I met her gaze. "She meant to help herself, and she used all of you to do it." Neither said anything after that. I kept walking. Later that night, I got a call from Halbrook. He said the county had formally charged Aubrielle with wire fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of funds. She'd been arrested quietly that morning and released on bail, but they expected a trial within the year. "She'll probably try to spin this," he said. "Claim it was all a misunderstanding. But we've got bank records, contractor statements, and her cousin already talking to investigators. You think she'll flip on anyone else? That depends on how much she wants to avoid jail time." The next day, a crew from the county came out and took down the Heritage Pines HOA sign from the front gate. The community would be under temporary county supervision until a new board could be elected with proper oversight. I stood at the top of my road watching them work, hands in my jacket pockets. The gravel crunch beneath their boots sounded just fine to me, no paving required. The sun was barely above the ridge when I stepped out to the porch with a mug of black coffee and the morning air still crisp. For the first time since this whole mess began, the place felt still again. The gravel road lay undisturbed, and no unfamiliar vehicles had prowled past in days. I could feel something shifting, like the pressure had finally broken. I didn't have long to enjoy the quiet. My phone vibrated on the porch rail. Caller ID said Deputy K. Ruiz. "Morning, Ellis," came her voice as I answered. It was calm, but there was a weight behind it. "You're going to want to stop by the substation. There's been a development." I didn't ask over the phone. I just said I'd be there in 20 minutes. Ruiz met me in the front lobby, her uniform crisp, no nonsense. She led me past the front desk and through a door marked Interview Room 2. But this wasn't an interrogation. On the table lay a cardboard evidence box with 3 sealed bags inside. "We executed a search warrant on Simmons' property late last night," she said. "Found these in her upstairs office closet, hidden behind a false panel." I looked down. One bag held a flash drive. Another, a spiral notebook with pages covered in scribbled initials, dates, and amounts. The third bag contained a checkbook, its ledger filled out in tidy, precise handwriting. "All of these tie directly to the HOA's accounts?" I asked. "More than that," Ruiz said. The flash drive had scanned invoices from the bogus contractor, but some of them weren't for paving or construction. They were for services that never occurred. Lawn maintenance, security patrols, even pest control, all billed monthly, all fabricated. Was she funneling more money than we thought? "Looks like it," Ruiz said. "Between the shell company and these fake service fees, she may have siphoned off closer to 80 grand over the last 3 years. And there's more." She pulled out a printed email chain. "We traced correspondence between Simmons and a former HOA treasurer. The treasurer resigned abruptly last year. We now know why." I scanned the emails. One line stood out. "You said this would be covered by the budget padding." I didn't agree to lie on bank statements. "She threatened him with a breach of contract lawsuit if he went public," Ruiz said. "He never responded after this email. Is he talking now?" "He is. He came in voluntarily this morning after we contacted him." Turns out he'd been keeping his own copies of the financials, suspecting she doctored the reports. I nodded slowly. So she wasn't just bending the rules, she was running a full con. "Grand theft, fraud, and coercion," Ruiz said. "We're adding a charge of witness intimidation based on her threats to the treasurer." "What about the other board members?" "That's where it gets complicated," she said. "We questioned Donna and Renee separately. Donna lawyered up immediately, but Renee cracked. She admitted they signed off on several of the expense reports without rating them. She claims Simmons assured them everything had been reviewed by the HOA's accountant. Did the accountant exist? Only on paper. Simmons created a fake name and email address. We traced it back to her home IP. I let out a low breath. This goes deeper than anyone thought. Ruiz gave a slow nod. The DA's office is preparing an indictment. We expect to arrest Simmons again, this time on a full range of felony charges. Donna and Renee may face recklessness-related charges, depending on how much they knowingly ignored. 2 days later, the sheriff's office executed the second arrest. It wasn't quiet this time. I was in my shed sorting through some old lumber when I heard the sirens not blaring, but present. A county cruiser and an unmarked vehicle pulled into the Simmons property. From my position behind the shed, I had a clear view of her porch as 2 deputies approached. Aubrielle answered the door wearing a robe, hair undone for the first time in memory. She didn't resist this time. Her hands were cuffed without fanfare, and she was led to the back of the cruiser as neighbors looked on from driveways and windows. That night, a new letter arrived in everyone's mailbox. This one came from the County Oversight Committee. It explained that the HOA's authority had been formally revoked. From that point forward, All community regulations would be overseen by a temporary resident council, until a new charter could be drafted, one with county review and approval. The residents had the option to dissolve the HOA entirely if they wished. A vote would be held the following month. At the meeting to discuss the vote, I sat toward the back of the room, arms folded as people argued over whether to keep any form of local governance at all. Most were leaning towards scrapping the whole thing. A few newer residents worried about property values, but even they admitted the last board had done more harm than good. Haverson stood up halfway through and turned to face the room. "We moved out here to get away from all this nonsense," he said. "HOAs are supposed to protect a neighborhood, not bleed it dry. If we can't trust the people running it, then we don't need it." When the vote finally happened, it wasn't close. 86% in favor of permanent dissolution. The HOA was officially dead. The next few weeks were uneventful in the best way. No new notices, no threats of fines, just the sound of kids playing in driveways and neighbors talking over fences again. Even Donna and Renee kept their heads low. With no more board to cling to, they quietly withdrew from public view. Caleb stopped by one afternoon with a six-pack and a tired grin. "You know," he said, "I've had cases where people stole more, but I've never seen someone build such an elaborate house of cards over a gravel road." I laughed. "She thought no one would fight back." "She thought wrong," he said, cracking open a bottle. "The day the gravel road was recertified by the county planning department, I framed the letter and hung it in my workshop. Not as a trophy, just as a reminder. A simple sentence stamped with the county seal. Road is compliant with rural zoning code and not subject to HOA regulation." At the end of the season, I hosted a cookout. First time in years. Neighbors brought folding chairs and dishes, someone set up a fire pit, and someone else brought a guitar. There were no speeches, no toasts, just people reclaiming their community. As the fire burned low and the last of the embers glowed in the pit, one of the younger couples from down the hill asked how I managed to pull it all together, how I knew where to look, who to call, what to document. "I didn't at first," I said. "I just knew something didn't smell right, and once you start pulling on the loose thread," the man nodded. "The whole thing unravels." "Exactly." The gravel crunched under their tires as they left, headlights sweeping past the gate. I stayed out a little longer, watching the stars come out one by one. No board meetings. No violation letters. No fake invoices. Just a dirt road, a quiet night, and a neighborhood finally free of its own worst enemy.